Hello everybody, my name's Dick Coughlan and today I'd like to talk to you about jokes. Telling jokes, and in fact listening to jokes, is not always about being told a full story. Sometimes it's about telling you a little bit of a story and letting you work the rest out for yourself if you care to do so. However, I tend to find that most people tend to listen to jokes, take them for what they are, either laugh or don't laugh or whatever, and then move on. And for me, this is a real shame, because I think by doing this, people are missing out on a great deal of appreciation and understanding of what a joke can actually mean. It's weird how it's very, very common and very, very ordinary and accepted for people to sit here and endlessly discuss or debate and even theorise about movies, about TV shows, and even about song lyrics. And yet doing so over a joke is incredibly rare. And I think that's a shame. So the purpose of this video is first of all to give you a couple of examples of various different types of jokes, and hopefully by doing so I can show you how you too can theorise and think about jokes in a way that you probably never have done before, and in doing so give you a much greater appreciation and understanding of not only what a joke is, but what a joke can be. So let's start with what is possibly the most well-known joke in the entire world. It's one that's also the easiest to deconstruct and understand, and that is, why did the chicken cross the road? To get to the other side. Now the interesting thing about this joke is, apart from being probably the most famous joke that's ever been written, it's what's commonly known as an anti-joke, wherein the humour is derived from the expectation of the listener as to where the punchline is and that the punchline is coming, and then when it doesn't, the confusion generally creates the laughter, usually for the person telling it or the people who are in on the fact that the punchline isn't there. Now, understanding why this works as a joke is pretty straightforward. All you need to do is consider what we know, or what people tend to think they know about chickens, and then consider what this joke is implying about the chicken it's talking about. Chickens aren't thought to be particularly intelligent creatures, so it's safe to assume that they have no understanding of roads, not only that they exist, but what they're there for, and that crossing one is indeed a decision that someone has to make at any point. They are seen as creatures that operate on instinct and very, very basic urges such as hunger, procreation, etc. Their perceived lack of intelligence permeates throughout many other sayings and many other parts of our language. For example, the phrase running around like a headless chicken is an expression we use to describe someone who's doing a lot of work but doesn't actually know why or what they're doing it for. So the very idea that anybody would ever look at or watch a chicken do anything, or in this case crossing the road, and then ponder and wonder to themselves whether or not there was a purpose, or in fact why this chicken was crossing the road, is in itself inherently ridiculous and stupid. That's where the humour and the joke really lies. Because of that, there is no need for a punchline. The punchline is in the existence of the joke itself. Therefore, all you need to do to finish it off is simply answer the question as best as we know, which is to get to the other side. But the real question is, why has this joke, which was first told, as far as we're aware, in the year 1847, why has it managed to endure and last throughout time, despite the fact that I think we can all agree no one's ever really laughed at it? Well, the reason it's managed to actually endure is because this joke, despite its simplicity, can be very easily built upon. It can be altered, it can be given different variations, and this was completely inadvertent. It inadvertently created thousands and tens of thousands, possibly hundreds of thousands of different variations of itself. It became a template for a joke. There are even multiple websites that are dedicated solely to doing nothing but reprinting and reproducing and listing different versions of the "why did the chicken cross the road" joke. Why didn't the chicken cross the road? Because he was a chicken. Why did half the chicken cross the road? To get to his other side. Why did the chicken cross the road to get to KFC? To see his brother. Why did the pervert cross the road? Because he couldn't get his dick out of the chicken. Why did the chicken cross the road is not just a very old-fashioned and very, very simple joke. It's actually probably the first ever real example of what we would nowadays describe as a viral meme. Why did the chicken cross the road was steamed hams before people were doing steamed hams. In fact, here's a bit of fun. Why don't you try and think of your own version of "why did the chicken cross the road" and then post it in the comments below, and we can all have a good laugh at each other. Now I'm going to move on and look at another joke, which is also an anti-joke, but it's one that's a lot more complex and definitely a lot less well known than "why did the chicken cross the road." This time I'm going to let the guy who I assume wrote it tell you it. This is Matthew Perry, who, as you know, played Chandler in Friends, on the chat show Ellen, telling you his peach joke.
This guy is standing on the street, and he has a giant peach for a head. And a man walks up to him and goes, you have a giant peach for a head. What's up with that? And the guy says, funny story, actually. A genie came up to me and granted me 3 wishes. And for my first wish, I asked to be rich. And a guy came up with a briefcase with $1 million, and I'm a millionaire. For my second wish, I asked the most beautiful woman in the world fall madly in love with me. Mila Kunis walked up to me and she said, I love you, and we're getting married in a month. For my third wish, I asked to have a giant peach as a head. About 50%.
Yeah. Now, the first thing I want to note here is that Matthew Perry has an absolutely fantastic deadpan delivery that is almost custom made for telling anti-jokes. It's not something he'll ever get a lot of credit for, it's not something that he'll ever be well known for, but I think it's worth pointing out that it's beyond flawless, his delivery of these jokes. Now, whereas the chicken joke didn't have a lot of, shall we say, details or information for us to work with or for us to build upon what that joke was, the peach joke, on the other hand, has multiple characters with multiple different types of agency and position. We have protagonists, we have antagonists, it has dialogue, and it has a full backstory to it. In fact, it's got so much information that in a way this joke kind of has the opposite problem that the chicken joke had. It almost has too much information and too much detail for us to actually build upon. Nothing is seemingly left unexplained or left to the imagination. This is a joke that is telling you a full story seemingly to completion. So instead of looking at the actual story of the joke, let's instead look at the joke's characters, in particular the joke's main protagonist, the guy with the giant peach for the head. Here are some thoughts that Matthew Perry himself gives on the joke in a later interview with Ellen.
First of all, the guy with the giant peach as a head, he's standing there, and somebody comes up to him and says, you got a giant peach for a head. What's up with that? And he says, funny story, actually, as if no one's ever brought this up before.
Yes.
That's hilarious.
I agree.
Right there.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
The second thing is, he's got 3 wishes. Now, a giant peach for a head is a very specific ask. Why wouldn't that be his first wish?
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
But you can go much, much more into detail with this when you stop and consider it even further. I want to know, what are the origins of this guy's desire to have a peach for a head? Is it a desire, or is it some kind of just thing he's always had? I mean, we live in a world where people have body modifications in various ones, tattoos and piercings and bits cut off and added on and screwed in and bits here and there to make themselves look like, you know, tigers or parrots or, you know, other forms of animals or, you know, Smurfs, whatever you fucking want. But these are all animals, these are all living, breathing creatures, so is it really too much of a leap to believe that there's someone out there who wants or has a desire to be a giant peach in some form, but just that because that's not really within the realms of modern body modification techniques, he's had to, this is the only way he could have theoretically gone about doing it. And when you consider all those other people, like the Parrot Man and the Tiger Man, who made themselves look as such, is it really that strange for someone to want to look like, I don't know, like an inanimate object or a piece of fruit? I mean, yes, obviously it's completely fucking mental, but that's not the point. But then let's consider what I think is the most important unanswered question of this joke. Is this guy's head going to age and ripen and ultimately rot and decay the same way that a normal peach does? Or was there part of the wish that this giant peach on his head would ultimately last forever? Because I assume the insides of his head work the same way, does that mean he could technically eat his own head? And if he, or indeed anybody else, did eat his own head, would that be it? Would he never be able to get his head? Or would there be a giant peach pit inside the centre of his head that he could then plant and then grow another fucking head, with which he could then just put on top of where his old one used to be? Also, and here's another one to consider, if he gets his wife, Mila Kunis, pregnant, what happens then? Does she give birth to a half Mila Kunis, half peach-like creature? And, you know, am I the only person who seems slightly, you know, shall we say, how can I put this, turned on by the thought of a peach-flavoured Mila Kunis? If this guy was to develop a medical condition like alopecia, which makes your hair fall out, would he then cease to be a peach and then become a giant nectarine? And if so, does that violate the wish of the genie that granted him the wish in the first place? I'm not joking when I say I could literally carry on asking countless hypothetical questions about the potential future consequences of us living in this alternate reality where there is a guy with a giant peach for a head. But I know this because I wasted virtually an entire day of my life writing it out. You know, like some absolute fucking cunt would do. Right? And because I don't want to waste an entire day of your lives, I'm going to move on now. However, I will ask you this, just like with the first one. Please, you know, have a think about this and post your comments below, expressing your thoughts, feelings, or concerns about, the future and the ability of whether or not human beings will be able to coexist with these giant peach-head man creatures in the future. Sorry, peach-headed people. I'm sorry. Now, the final joke I'm going to look at today is, in my opinion, it's possibly the greatest one-liner joke that's ever been told. And one of the reasons for that, it's not too surprising, because it was told by the man who is, in my opinion, the greatest one-liner comedian of all time, Stephen Wright.
She said, "You're wearing two different color socks." I said, "Yes, but to me they're the same because I go by thickness."
Now, if you want to take it as it is, this is nothing more than a pretty clever joke. But if you want to delve deeper into it, and let's face it, that's the fucking point of this video, then you realise that there's so much more to it than that. The most obvious interpretation is this is simply an interaction between someone who's a bit of an uptight pedant who's pulling someone up over what he considers a very trivial matter, and him being a bit of a quick-witted smartass has come out with this response to it and has thrown it back in this cunt's face. Now that in and of itself, though, could easily be interpreted as a sort of an expression of someone's individuality, their freedom of thought, their independent way of living and being themselves and standing out from the crowd. It should be about how we should celebrate our desire to not conform to the arbitrary standards and values that, are imposed upon us and that we seem to go along with, and yet when you stop and consider, there's no real sense or logic behind them. Especially when that standard is something as meaningless and irrelevant as whether or not your socks look the same. Within the context of this joke, what Stephen Wright has done is something that has actually occurred many times throughout human history. And it's arguably the most impactful and purest form of a human being rebelling against a system or against an idea that makes no sense. All he's done is ask, why? That's it. He's questioned something. He's challenged it. And not only that, he's gone to the full extent of actually standing by what he believes in and putting on two socks that do not look the same, that are mismatched colours, mismatched patterns, what have you, and he's gone out and he's making people deal with it. But he's not rubbing it in people's faces, he's not being aggressive with it. For within the joke, it is the person who's asking him and questioning him about his socks. They're the person to whom the problem exists. They're the person for whom this thing actually matters. And it is they who ask him, and when they ask him, he simply responds with the fact of the matter. He responds with what the reality is. And he doesn't apologise, he doesn't stop and think about it, he just answers it and moves on as if it doesn't matter, which it doesn't. In 1955, there was a woman called Rosa Parks who decided she was not going to let society deem her less worthy of having a seat on a bus simply because of the colour of her skin. So she refused to get up and refused to fucking move to the back of the bus or stand so some white person could have their seat. Because why the fuck should the way someone looks, should the colour of their skin determine their value to such a ridiculous degree that it decides who gets a bus seat before someone else? And I know some of you are probably sat there now thinking, hold on Richard, you're not comparing what happened, Stephen Wright's joke. You're not suggesting that this is in some way analogous or some way an allegorical story or interpretation of Rosa Parks or indeed the civil rights movement. And the answer to that is yes, I fucking am. In fact, I will go further than that. Because what's important to remember here is that technically speaking, Stephen is doing with his socks exactly what everyone else does. Why do your socks not match? Because the thing that matters is that they match, and his socks do match. His socks do match as much as anyone else's. The difference is he has a different criteria. He has chosen to pick a different, he's chosen a different characteristic or aspect of the sock in which to judge it by, in which he believes is more important or is much more relevant than that of how it appears to anyone else who's looking at it. The aesthetics of it don't matter to him as much as the thickness. And there's no real reason or no justification anybody could give as to why that is not just as valid a reason to have your socks match as anything else. Now, you might think that judging a pair of socks based on their thickness is maybe just as valid or justified, but it's no more arbitrary or meaningless or irrelevant as the people who choose to judge them based on colour and appearance. But actually, that's not true. Because ask yourself this, why were socks created in the first place? What function and purpose do socks serve? They're not meant to just make our feet feel more fashionable or stylish. They're not meant to look good, because for the most part, people don't see them. They're supposed to keep our feet warm, or make our feet more comfortable. And to some degree, they're supposed to protect our feet. So, if that's the reason socks were invented and that's the purpose and function they serve, what characteristic or quality that they possess do you feel is more relevant and more important when judging whether or not a sock should be worn on your feet? Colour or thickness? Doesn't matter what colour your socks are, that's not going to change how effective they are on your feet. If any one sock is perfectly capable and given the circumstances it is the best and most logical option for you to wear, then why should anything else other than that matter? Why should its appearance be a factor? Why is it fair to discriminate against a sock because through no fault of its own it happens to not be aesthetically pleasing or acceptable to society in general, to whom it's none of their business and to whom it hurts nobody? Who decided that it was wrong for people to mix different coloured socks with each other and wear them as if they were equal? How can the true value and worth of anything be based purely on how it appears to you? Because I have a dream, folks. I have a dream that one day we will rise up. I have a dream that one day we will pull our socks up regardless of what they look like, regardless of whether they match, and regardless of whether they were intended to be together. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all socks are created equal. I have a dream that my mismatched and randomly assorted collection of socks will one day live in a world where they will not be judged by the colour of the material they're made out of, but by the content of their character or whether or not they keep the rain out. And when we allow sock-wearing freedom to ring, when we let it ring from every city, to every hamlet, to every state, to every nation around the world, we will be able to speed up that day when all of our socks, be they black socks, white socks, plain socks, pattern socks, novelty socks or boring old socks, and everybody who wears them all with pride will be able to roll up their trouser legs, join hands and sing together, free at last, free at last. Great God Almighty, we are free at last. And that's why I think Stephen Wright's sock joke is the best one-liner joke ever. If you've got another interpretation of it, please post it below. Anyway, that's the end of this video, folks. Thank you very much for listening. I hope you've enjoyed it. And if you have enjoyed it, please feel free to support me on Patreon. And if you, I know this is a bit of a different video, so I'm going to request that if you have watched this far, I'm assuming you have enjoyed it, or you haven't finished masturbating yet. But either way, whatever your reason is, I really do want to hear some feedback. Because if you'd like to see more videos like this, believe me, I can do this till I can bore you to tears with shit like this till it's coming out my arse. But anyway. Please let me know what you think. Other than that, my name's Dick Coughlan. This is Brother Neuro saying good night. May God be less.